So we're going to start tonight with sensorial development, just the basic introduction. My subtitle here is The Sensorial Explorer. That is what Maria Montessori defined as her students, because they explore their environment using all of their senses. So we're coming off of our practical life class and we're transitioning into sensorial. In practical life, we talked about the ways that helps acclimate a child to the environment, the ways in which it helps the child become normalized to the classroom. And through that experience, it helps prepare children for their sensorial experiences. So before kids work with the more advanced sensorial materials, they should have had a thorough introduction into practical life. Especially those preliminary exercises, they really need to have mastered those before you start introducing a lot of the shelf work in the classroom, including the sensorial. But it helps them build inner discipline and the capacity for concentration. It helps them build confidence, the development of their will. You guys know what that means, their will? Anyone describe what a will is?
What they want.
Yeah. What they want. So it helps them make choices, to be responsible for their actions, to know what they want and know how to get what they want in a productive way. I think some people have it wrong when we talked about strong-willed children. I think it's actually the opposite of what we intend for that to mean, because a will means if they've developed it properly, then they can constructively make decisions, where strong-willed children haven't necessarily fully developed their will, and that's why they're constantly butting heads with people who are interacting with them, because they want to be able to do this and they want to be able to do that, but they don't know the constructive way to make those things happen within the constraints of their environment.
Would you listen to
It helps them learn how to move in the environment, order and the need for classification, and of course learning how to do a full cycle of activity. Can anyone remind me what the cycle of activity is?
3 hours.
But it's not the full work cycle. What are the kids doing during the work cycle? They're completing individual cycles of activity. They go to the shelf, they decide what they want to work with, they take it to a proper place in the classroom, they work with it for as long as they want to, and when they're finished, they put it away. So that's the cycle of activity, is starting an activity from the beginning and doing it and then completing the activity.
Okay, that makes sense.
So the work cycle is where they do lots of cycles of activity. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so practical life is where we introduce that cycle of activity in the work cycle, and then they can start transitioning into more academic areas like sensorial. So what does sensorial do that's different than practical life? These materials are not offered to help a child use their senses, because every child naturally knows how to use their senses, but it helps them consciously classify the sense impressions that are received. So it helps them classify their environment, because in practical life they've learned the need for order, and now we're showing them how that order works within our environment. So the sensorial materials demand 3 things: precision of movement, manual dexterity, and heightened awareness. Who can explain what they think precision of movement means?
Ability to reach for and grasp what they're trying to grasp, like those little kind of controlled, I can do what I'm intending to do.
Exactly. I can do what I'm intending to do. That's perfect phrasing. Manual dexterity plays into that. It works on their fine motor skills, being able to manipulate their hands in the way that they want to manipulate their hands. And then heightened awareness. Awareness for what, do you think?
Visual, just depth perception.
Sure, that could definitely be something. So there's going to be a million different things within our environment that we're experiencing sensorially that we need to be aware of. So we need to be able to see and notice those minute distinctions within our environment. And then leading forward, Sensorial helps prepare for the more advanced academic areas in the classroom like math and language. So just some basic concepts here that you guys should kind of keep in mind as we're introducing sensorial activities. In math, it helps us lay the foundation for units of measurement, for understanding the relativity of size and shapes. That leads into geometry concepts. And then specifically for the Children's House sensorial materials, it gives us the concept of base 10, or the decimal system. So you will notice in many of these sensorial activities in Children's House, the materials are all in tens. So if you recognize the pink tower, the brown stairs, the red rods, the cylinder blocks, the knobless cylinders, those all have 10 components to them. So it's just subconsciously laying that foundation for them. And then for language, everything that we do in practical life, we talked about this, but moving from left to right, it's even more distinct in sensorial activities, for many of them anyway. It helps develop that hand-eye coordination for writing skills later on, and we're really focusing on the pincer grasp still in sensorial, and it helps expand their vocabulary. So it's not just learning to explore the environment, but how to describe the environment as well. So we're introducing a lot of new language. So what senses are we refining? How many senses do you guys know of? What are the basic senses we have?
Taste, touch, hearing.
Taste, touch, smell, hearing, and
Visual.
sight. So there's 5 basic senses that Maria Montessori has turned into 10. So we're breaking down specifically touch. So let's go over the first 4 main ones. We have sight, that's our visual sense. That's everything that we see, that we perceive. With our younger students, things like object permanence goes into play there. Are you thinking about something, Becca?
I'm missing one.
You're missing one?
Yeah.
Oh, it's behind you. You don't want to look at it though, do you? So with sight, we're going to break that down into a few different categories in the 0 to 3 component. In Children's House, it's kind of just basically its own thing. So we have our visual sense. We have hearing, which is technically called auditory. So everything that we hear, we have different perceptions of pitch. So if it's a high pitch, if it's a low pitch, we can also recognize soft versus loud sounds. So there's different distinctions there. Music enrichment can have a lot to do with this auditory part of sensorial. We have taste. Did you guys know that the official term for taste is gustatory?
I was just noticing that. That's so weird.
Olfactory smell.
Yeah, so taste, we do lots of taste testing experiments. With our really young ones, we're just introducing textures in our mouth. So gustatory isn't necessarily just taste, it's all the sensations of the tongue in the mouth. And then we have smell, which is the olfactory. I can never say that one properly. But we smell different things. It could be a sweet smell, it could be a sour smell. So we have similar to the way that we distinguish tastes, we can distinguish smells. And with younger students, we really see can they tell the difference, and do they prefer sweet smells over foul smelling things? Do they like to smell like poop? That's a good indicator that they might be ready to start toileting. They can recognize that they're poopy and they know it smells. And then touch is where we really get into some specifics. So we have 5 different areas, or 6 different areas that we really focus on within touch. The basic sense of touch is your tactile. So textures, is it rough, is it smooth, is it hard, is it soft? That's our basic sense of touch. And then we have a muscular sense, and that's kind of a full body awareness. With our older kids, we're going to be doing a lot of gross motor activity. Those are our large body movements, being able to coordinate, to run, to skip, to climb. All of those different things are going to help us with our kinesthetic motions. And then for our younger students, we're working on sensory motor type skills, where it's kind of the awareness of being able to do what you want to do with your hand. I see something I want to touch. Can I actually reach out and touch it? Stereognostic. What is that? If nobody else knows, I bet Becca knows.
I have it right here.
You have it right here?
Yeah.
Does anybody know it off the top of their head? Nobody? Miss Becca, you don't even know?
Is it using your sense of hearing while removing your visual?
It's just it's the blind man sense.
Yes.
It's removing sights from the equation, which helps you heighten the other senses that you're focusing on. Specifically, we usually use it with the tactile sense. So we'll introduce things like mystery bags or a blindfold so that they can just really experience the texture of an activity and be able to define what it is just based on feeling and not seeing it. So eliminating your sight. We have the sense of weight, which is the baric sense. So is something heavy, is something light. Temperature is another breakdown. So our thermic sense, is it cold, is it warm? Is it cool? We have lots of different ways to describe weather. And then we have the sense of pain. Now, we wouldn't really do activities that demonstrate pain for the kids, would we? So specifically, there's two different types of pain. There's piercing pain, which is painful, and then there's pressure. And we do have activities that help them refine their sense of pressure. Pressure cylinders specifically in Children's House. So is it a light pressure? Is it a heavy pressure? Does it take a lot of force to push it down, or is it very easy to push down? Those are your sense of pressure.
Those are fun.
Yeah.
I got to play with them when I was in fifth grade.
Oh, nice.
I mean, work with them.
Play is the important work of early childhood, so it's okay.
Is the piercing like in Miss Katie's class where she has the push pins? Or did you mean something that actually pierces them?
Yeah, piercing would, like pain would be like you're experiencing pain. Really the only way that we work on that sense is helping students identify in themselves when they're in pain. So, oh, that must have hurt. How does that feel? And so then being able to express themselves when they're in pain is an important concept, but it's not like an activity that we would do with them.
Yeah.
Let me poke your finger. Let me know if this hurts.
I'm so sorry.
That's called pain.
So no, we're not doing that for the record. Please don't invent any pain activities.
I've noticed it's kind of like one of my students that is potty trained fell and hit her bottom on the stairs, and she was like, "My bottom! Ow! It hurts!" So she's got that down.
She knows. She
Did
knows.
Montessori do pain stuff?
No.
Okay.
No,
I
it's
just
just
didn't know if there was like some weird thing that happened.
no.
That's
It's
the
just
sense in and of
defining
itself.
the different
That makes-
senses.
I was like, I don't think she would do that.
No.
but not levels
It's
of
more
activity.
just like teaching it when it happens.
Yeah,
I
that's a
didn't know.
learning
I mean, they did
opportunity
Yes.
versus an actual activity.
Children,
Yes.
when they were children that were just like thrown out. So
No.
That's what I was trying to think of as we were
I
talking
didn't
about
know
it. It's more
when
of
she
a
worked in
learning
the psych ward
opportunity.
unit
Yes,
of the place
exactly.
where she had all the kids if they did stuff. That's why I was curious.
No, just
I
defining
did
them.
weird things to kids back then.
No worries. So one thing that sensorial activities do more than any other is isolate concepts. And this is where we really start focusing on the isolation of difficulty by isolating specific ideas and concepts. So all the materials isolate a specific quality so that that child can work and repeat that activity and hopefully help focus their attention on learning a particular quality. Can anyone think of an example of an activity that isolates a quality, what we might be talking about?
The cylinders, they go from, the knob cylinders, they go from shallow to deep.
Mm-hmm.
So would that be one?
Yeah, so that works on the quality of depth perception and distinguishing differences in size. So it doesn't mix qualities because you can mix it by each of the cylinders having a different shape, where they're all cylinders versus having different prisms throughout.
What about the ones that they get longer, but they also get wider?
It's still just differentiating between sizes.
Okay.
The quality we're isolating is size. There's not a color distinction, there's not a shape distinction, it's just size distinctions.
Okay.
But that is also why we focus on different blocks at different times, and we'll introduce that when we get into working with the materials. There's a specific block that we start with that has the most extreme difference in that particular quality, and then we start working on more minute differences. So that's kind of what we talk about through the rest of here.
So would quality be like when we do with the babies? This is warm water, this is cold water.
Yeah, so in that we're focusing on temperature.
Okay.
We're focusing on one sense. And that could be something that you consider. So with vision, there's many different qualities that you might focus on. So like I said, you have shapes, you have sizes, you have colors. Those are all different qualities, and you want to focus on one or the other. Where the rest of them, you just want to focus on a particular sense. So within touch, you want to focus on just the sense of temperature, for example. We'll introduce the touch boards, which just focus on the difference between rough and smooth. And so you're introducing a specific quality, and there will be vocabulary that goes along with that quality that you'll then introduce the vocabulary to. So these materials also offer a specific language component to help a child focus on labeling their environment. So in the beginning, we're not going to be introducing the language, we're just going to be introducing the sensorial experience, and that's going to help them learn how to categorize their environment, which helps them organize their intelligence, and then we'll focus on the language component after that.
It's going to be on Padlet later.
Okay. Just jot notes if it's something I said and didn't write. And then we're focusing on sense perception, which helps with perceptual difficulties. So through the repetition of exploring the materials, the opportunity is given to recognize similarities and differences within the qualities. And we always start with the most extreme differences, and then we refine that skill to more minute distinctions. So a good example of that would be, I'll just show you the pink tower, for example. When we do introduce something like language to this, we're going to start with the extremes. So I have a large and I have small. This is a very distinct difference to me, where if I introduced these two, and I just started with which one of these is large? Well, you have a reference point of a smaller object, but this is a very minute distinction versus the extreme distinction. So we always start with extremes and then we'll refine. And eventually this will help them recognize these same qualities within their environment and find order in their world. So once they learn the concept, then we want to extrapolate that knowledge and bring it into everything in our classroom, or things that we notice outside. You know, that bird is larger than that bird. So you want to bring it to real life experiences for them. But through working with these types of materials, it helps teachers identify if a child has difficulty perceiving certain components in their environment, like color. We do a lot of work with colors, and through using the materials, especially when they get into Children's House, you can start to identify, does this child have a deficiency in a specific area because they're unable to feel warm and cold, or they're unable to recognize these different colors. And so it can help you start having conversations with parents based on the materials themselves, because through repetition they should be able to start categorizing things. Now, don't jump to conclusions, especially if you work with a toddler or two. It's very normal for them to not be able to complete these activities fully. So this is similar to the materialized abstractions. Montessori sensorial materials are concrete materials that convey abstract qualities. Anybody understand what that means? Yeah, this one's kind of got to wrap your mind around it, and some discussion will help here. So let me go through the rest of the slide, and then I'll try to give you some examples. A concept is a cognitive unit of meaning that has been named by a human. So some sort of unit of measurement that we've given a name to. So large, small, those are units of measurement that we've just named. It is an idea that is formed in the mind, which is usually abstract in quality. So the abstract component of large and small is that they're relative, right? So if I say that this is large, well, that depends on what I'm comparing it to. So the term large, the concept of something being large, is very abstract. You can't just try to help a child understand the difference between large and small without giving them a physical item to manipulate to learn the concept. So that's why we call them materialized abstractions, because they're materials that help you identify abstract concepts. Does that make a little bit more sense? Okay. So abstract concepts are usually difficult to understand because they cannot be referenced to a specific concrete material or object. In general, that's the case, but we're giving them concrete objects to reference. And the sensorial materials, when they understand this concept, liberate the child to be a free thinker by allowing him to make his own discoveries. So once he understands what those abstract concepts are through the use of the physical materials, then he can start, again, extrapolating that knowledge and applying it to other things in his world. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Do we need any more examples of a materialized abstraction?
Mm-hmm.
So the best ones in the beginning are going to be size differences. So the red rods demonstrate the difference between long and short. So if I say something is long, how do you know it's long? What makes it long?
So in reference to.
It has to be in reference to something else. So if I said this is long and this is short, well, we lay them on the ground, we don't stand them up. So this is long, and when you do the demonstration, you feel it, so you can feel the length. And this is short. So I'm giving them something very physical, something very tangible to identify long and short. Is this helping?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'll do another one.
Thick and thin?
Yes, so brown stairs, thick and thin. So if I were to just say this is thick, well, that doesn't mean anything to me. It's pretty thin compared to me. I don't know about you guys. But if I'm comparing it to this one, then we have thick and thin. This is thin, this is thick. But it's only a comparison. And so when you just say it, you're labeling them, and they're going to learn the names of the labels. It's through their work with the material that they'll start to understand those distinctions. And then it will come even further clear when you start to give the more refined distinction. So I have large, smaller, 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 smallest. So I have the largest, and I have the smallest. And you can have them label those. But then if I take some away, now which one is largest? This one. Now which one is smallest? It's this one. Well, if I put them back together in the group, this is no longer largest and this is no longer smallest. So through the work of the material, they're going to start understanding that all those kinds of abstract concepts have to be relative. And of course, we're not having this long discussion with them because even you guys are like, what are you talking about? Because the work and the material itself is what's going to help them make that understanding.
I feel like the concept of concrete and abstract was a lot easier to understand in comparison with the language material. Seeing the concrete material of tracing the letters and stuff, and the abstract is them taking a pencil to write it flatly on paper.
Okay. So you feel like this concept is difficult? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know why, but yes.
So the difference between concrete and abstract in general is hands-on versus idea.
Okay.
So our concrete is always going to be physical. Our abstract is typically going to be our idea. And that will change a little bit when we get into language and math. The physical is still going to be your concrete, where the writing typically is more the abstract. So writing and ideas, words and things like that are the abstract ideas.
Or even recognizing it in its written form, like as far as math goes.
Yeah.
The abstract.
Yeah, exactly. So like the quantity in math is concrete, where you can count out the physical objects, where the written numeral is abstract.
Okay.
that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we always want to start with the physical. Whatever we can manipulate is going to be the concrete component. I'll leave it there because I might need it again. All right. So you guys all got materialized abstractions?
Oh, duh. Yeah.
All right. Another component that is contained within sensorial materials and Montessori materials in general is control of error, or the component of self-correcting, meaning that something built into the material helps a child check his own work and know if a mistake has been made. The thing I love about control of error is it takes the focus off the child being incorrect and puts the focus on the material having something that needs to be corrected. So it helps them, the benefits here, they learn how to analyze and problem solve, but it also helps them develop independence and self-confidence because they know I didn't do something wrong, it's the material that needs to be fixed. I don't need to be fixed. It's the material. And then in general, there are two types of control of error. As much as possible, we want the first one. So when you make an activity, when you do your original, you're going to want to try to figure out how can you include a control of error in the material itself. But it's purely mechanical. It means that the material itself includes something that causes that control of error to be there. Versus what you want to get to, the more abstract control of error, is that the child's understanding actually allows them to discriminate those errors through their experience. So a pink tower is a good example that it's really just the visual sense that helps the control of error. Obviously, if I try to put this under here, well, it stood, but it probably wouldn't stand as well. It's more likely, it's not as stable, it's going to fall over. And visually, the visual or the child's control of error is visually seeing that something doesn't look right here. I can just visually see that something is off and it's not built correctly. Now, the physical component of this activity, where the control of error lies, is the smallest cube. Will actually complete the ledge of each section because of the way it has been scientifically developed to be just the proper size. See the difference between those two types? Now, with infant activities especially, and then a lot of the toddler activities, some of the control still lies within the teacher. It's going to be your involvement that causes that control of error to be obvious to the child. So we'll discuss it when we discuss each of the activities, but there's definitely more control of error in the activities of sensorial built in than there were with practical life. So types of sensorial lessons, for the most part, when we talk about sensorial lessons, they're going to fall into one of these categories. Typically, the initial activity will be one of these, and then a lot of the extensions will fall into other categories. So you need to know the initial presentation, which of these are we really following. So you need to know the sense that you're using, and then which of these lessons you'll be giving to start. So we have sorting exercises, which you perceive differences in recognizing contrasts. So we have different categories of objects that you sort into this pile versus this pile. So this, these things match and these things match type of thing. So yes, so that kind of goes into play with your sorting clothes. Was more of a sensorial sorting exercise, but we classified as practical life, so you're good. And then we have actual matching activities, which these would be identical objects that you're matching together. And typically there's more than one object that you'd have to match. So you have multiples in your, pressure cylinders if you're matching color tablets together. They have a specific pair. You pair items together. There's discrimination between extreme ends of the spectrum. So that's going to be large and small. That's preparation for grading. It means that you're understanding the two extremes, but we haven't put any of the middle pieces in there yet. So grading would be recognizing those more finite differences. So I have largest, smaller, 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 smallest. That's grading from one extreme to the next. And then we have recall of sensory perception, which are memory games. And a lot of times what memory games are is you set up activities from one side of the classroom to the other side of the classroom, or maybe from one table to another table, where maybe I have my pink tower blocks on this work rug, but I want you to build the pink tower on the work rug across the room. And you can only carry one piece at a time across the room. So you have to remember from that work rug to that work rug where you're at in the process, or what you're supposed to be matching. Yeah, so that's a really fun extension that you can do with a lot of the activities. There's language activities, which that's going to be where we start introducing the 3-period lesson. And don't worry, we're going to do a whole thing on 3-period lessons. And then we have exploration and new discoveries. So this kind of comes first and last. With our infants, we're going to be doing a ton of exploration exercises, toddlers as well, ton of exploration. And then the older Children's House students will start doing more new discoveries. So they're going to reinvent the activities and decide their own extensions that they can do with the materials. And so in the beginning and in the end, there's really no wrong way to work with sensorial materials if they're, being nice to them. The wrong way would be to throw them. But we want to encourage our students as much as possible to explore the materials beyond the specific activity that we've introduced to them, as long as they're using them in a nice way. So make sure you guys remember that new discoveries term. What is a new discovery?
It's coming up with their own extensions.
Perfect. All right, moving on to 3-period lesson. So this is a naming lesson that we use when we introduce vocabulary to a student. And as you can guess, there are 3 periods in it. So we break it down into 3 very distinct steps, and depending on the age of the child, will determine how far in the sequence you get. Sometimes we only get to the first period. That's the naming lesson, and that's where you simply identify what the object or the concept is. So I'm using our pink tower as an example. With an infant or toddler, I might do a naming lesson on cube. This is a cube. See the cube? Would you like to explore the cube? And give the child the cube and they explore it. That could be the whole lesson. They're not ready to point to it. They're not ready to say the name of the material. We're just introducing it. The second period is going to be a recognition stage. It's where you start having them do things with the material to see that they actually associate the name of the object with the object. So I'll set the cube down in front of the child and I'll ask the child, can you pick up the cube? Can you hand me the cube? So first of all, they might just be following directions. It's kind of with the younger ones, we want to make sure that they can at least do that. But it's helping me understand that they recognize this as a cube. And then I'll have them do lots of different things with the cube to see that they really understand what it is. And then when they start having vocabulary and they can talk back to me, then I'm going to do the third period, which is, what is this? A cube! And of course our infants were not expecting that they get to the third period. It's super exciting to get to the second period because they're starting to follow direction. Yeah, so some of them can get to the second period. Our older toddlers and 2s for sure. And then of course Children's House should be able to get to that second period, no problem. And then on to the third period. So really what we use this for a lot of times is contrasting concepts. So in this case, I'm going to introduce large and small. So the way that you do a 3-period lesson when you have 2 objects is you just spend a little bit more time in each period. So this is large, this is small. Would you like to hold large? Yes. Good. Would you like to hold small? Very good. Can you hand me small? Thank you. Can you hand me large? Thank you. Can you move large right here? Can you move small right here? Can you hold large in your hands? Good. Can you set large down right here? Can you hand small to Natalia? Very good. I'm going to set it back down right there. Thank you. So you're going to spend a lot of time in the second period, especially the younger the child is, the less vocabulary the child is. You might just stay in this area, and you're going to do a lot of exploration. Do they really associate the words that I'm giving them to the specific objects in which they're supposed to be associated?
Is that still the second period?
That's still the second period.
Okay.
So the third period is your test. Can they recall the names of the objects? What is this? What is this? High five! Okay, great. You passed. So third period, super short. It's just the basic test. Do they recall?
Is that what it would look like in a children's house as well?
Yep. And the time that you spend in the second period just varies from child to child. Even in children's house, you're going to have some younger kids who don't yet have their vocabulary, and you might spend a lot of time in second period.
Okay.
Make sense? Okay. Let's see. Colors are a great way. I mean, a lot of these we're going to be using 3-period lessons to demonstrate the vocab, but colors are a really good example of a 3-period lesson. We can use candy even. So let's see. I've got a Reese's. Oh, that's popcorn. I'm sorry.
What did you think it was?
I thought it was candy in the bag. All right, Natalia. This is a Reese's. You may not eat it. But this is a Reese's. This is a Crunch Bar. Would you like to hold the Reese's without eating it? Oh. Yeah. So in the first period, you want to let them explore the object. Don't just make them look at it without touching it. Would you like to hold the Crunch Bar? Good. Can you hand me? What?
You didn't say she couldn't eat that one.
Oh. No, I don't want that. I'm not eating it. Can you hand me the Crunch Bar? Thank you. Can you hand me the Reese's? Thank you. Can you put the Reese's right here, please? Okay. Can you put the Crunch Bar on your head? Good job. Wow, you're even balancing it. Can you put the Crunch Bar on your knee? There.
Yes, I
Can you eat the Crunch Bar?
No.
No. Okay.
Doesn't have nuts in it.
Now,
Probably is
in
probably
this
good
stage,
food.
we're fine. We're not free down here. Or we don't have to be not free down here.
Wow.
In the second period, if a child is showing issues with picking the correct one, then you probably need to take it back. We're not even going to think about moving on to the third period if they can't get through the second period, because then you're just setting the child up for failure. They obviously don't recognize them, and we're not going to hope that they recall what it is when they can't even point to the right one. Does that make sense? Okay. So there's lots of vocabulary terminology that you can use in the second period as far as show me, point to, do this, do that. You want them to do lots of different things with the materials. And the younger they are, the more you're going to have to be kind of engaged with them and doing different things with them to keep them interested. And otherwise, they're just like, yes, I know what that is. I know what that is. Can we be done? So you have to do fun things with it. And then, what is this? What is it? Good. Oh wait, this one is mine. I'm taking that one back. All right, so I want you guys to start practicing 3-period lessons. Depending on how much time we have at the end, I might have you guys practice them here, but you're going to have a little quiz next week on giving a 3-period lesson at the end of class. So definitely start practicing them. You need to know the order, and I'm sure Natalia and Becca probably could tell you guys how difficult it is to remember the order to do that in the first few times you demonstrate it. It seems pretty straightforward, but when you're in the moment, especially with the child, you get out of order. So, actually, Elena, you had to do it last year.
Yeah, and after I did it, I was helping in your class, and so I was trying to use it on the kids, and I kept mixing it all up too. It was hard.
Yeah, it's definitely one you have to practice. And, I mean, it's the same order no matter what vocab you're introducing, and so it's just helpful to be really well aware of what you're doing. Now, with the younger students, you can introduce just one thing at a time, and you can do a 3-period with one object. As they get older, the 2s especially, I'd start doing 2 materials with. Toddlers, kind of based on the big toddler, what they're ready for. And then younger children's house, probably stick with 2. The max that we do is 3 objects. You never want to do more than 3 vocabs at a time, new vocabs. If you do a review, you can include more in there, just kind of a testing period. But if it's brand new, don't do more than 3. And the 3 periods, the period before the 3-period lesson should always be the exploration. You should never introduce language for a material before the child has had the opportunity to explore and work with the material. So Pink Tower is a good example. We are always going to build the tower and let them explore the tower before we ever introduce the concept of large and small, because we want them to have that foundation of what it looks like and how it works and how it manipulates and what it feels like before we give it a name. Give them a really solid
the
reference.
Period of the first period lesson was to explore, or the 3-period lesson.
The first period of the 3-period lesson is to name the object, and you have the child explore it during that time.
So name.
Naming. It's the naming lesson. So when you name it, you want to hand it to them to actually feel it.
Okay,
They've
you're
already
talking
explored
about,
it.
Like they're exploring it without us, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So the,
Alright.
the activities that we talked about in the previous slides about grading and matching, one of them was an exploration. You want them to have that exploration of the material before you name it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then when you name it, you want to have an immediate exploration of the material. So this period is a vital step in learning the material, that exploration portion. And then I just really liked this quote from Maria Montessori. The child has a different relation to his environment than ours. So kids obviously do not see the world the way that we see the world. The child absorbs it. The things he sees are not just remembered, they form part of his soul. He incarnates himself all in the world around him that his eyes see and his ears hear. So no pressure, but you guys are a huge part of the way that the world is ingrained within your kids. Because everything that you do, everything that you say, they hear and they see, and it becomes a part of their psyche. So don't mess up.
No pressure.